Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. Well, let's get right into it. Something came down today. Larry Brown and the SMU basketball program, that's Southern Methodist University, have been punished for violations of academic fraud and all that kind of stuff. Basically, what happened is there was a player for SMU named Keith Frazier who was brought into the program, and an assistant apparently encouraged him to take an online course to meet eligibility requirements, and then turned around and took the course for him. Well, that's a big no-no, and thus SMU will be banned from postseason play for, I believe, just this season. But Larry Brown himself will be banned, suspended for 9 games. And this is kind of a big deal because there's a lot of little intricacies in this story. The main one, unfortunately, for as great of a coach as Larry Brown is, he just doesn't seem to understand the fact that certain things can't be done. Now, I'll get into what he knew here in a second, but the overall arching idea is there are certain things that occur under his watch that he just doesn't seem to feel are necessary to keep control of. Now, this is kind of a different case, but just in the overall grand scheme, as I mentioned, he has been a coach at several institutions, but he has been accused of similar academic issues at 3 major schools now: SMU, UCLA, and the University of Kansas, all of which faced sanctions either while he was there or immediately after he left. So, I mean, the guy is an excellent coach. You can take nothing away from that. I mean, he's turned around SMU like that. I mean, they're a top 25 team probably going into the opening of the basketball season when that comes around. And it's a shame for them that obviously they're not going to be able to take part in the NCAA tournament, especially if they're picked to be that good. But these are the kind of things that happens. Now, the thing that I don't like is apparently the NCAA admits in its investigation that Larry Brown knew absolutely nothing about this until the very end, but his suspension and his punishment is due to the fact that he did not immediately turn over all the information and report it to the NCAA. I mean, really, that is what, to me, where the NCAA is kind of a joke. If you are willing to say that the head basketball coach of a program knew absolutely nothing about this until the very end, until somebody actually had already kind of reported it and the NCAA was investigating it, and basically it's like, oh, he didn't tell us about it, so we have to suspend him. To me, that's kind of a joke. It shows you what kind of a sham the NCAA has become. Because I mean, I understand in the perfect world, that's the kind of situation that you would be in, to where it's like, oh, well, wrongdoing has happened under my watch, so here, I'll just report it. Well, Larry Brown is notorious, in a good way, for caring about his kids. They are people under his watch. He considers himself their parent while the parents are not there, for good or bad. And it's nobody in their right mind that considers himself a parent is going to sit there and turn around and say, well, I'm basically going to flush this kid's future down the toilet and hope that the NCAA will allow him to play and all this kind of stuff. He knows that by doing that, he'd be costing the assistant his job. He'd be costing the kid his future in terms of any kind of basketball future with the university. So no, nobody's going to turn that in. It is kind of a double-edged sword. It's like, yes, if you don't turn it in, then you run the risk of this sort of stuff happening. And this information just came out today on ESPN, so nothing was really said in the article about Frazier's future, whether or not he will be allowed to play at the institution or not. I don't know enough about his future to see if he had any eligibility left. This might have been for last year. But the bottom line is, I understand where Larry Brown is coming from. Did he do the right thing? No. But the right thing is not necessarily always the right thing, because turning the people in is something I can't imagine anybody doing unless you had some lawyer basically telling you, hey, you better get in front of this thing, turn these people in just to save the overall program, because it's not necessarily fair to those other kids to not be able to play in postseason basketball because something happened where some dumbass assistant, excuse my language, some dumb assistant basically just was like, oh yeah, we'll sneak this guy in, I'm going to take his classes for him. You can't do that. That's just not right. That guy should be punished, but I don't necessarily know that it should apply to the whole team. But then you kind of get into gray areas, and I understand that, to where it's like, well, if you just punish the assistant, then you'll get people hiring assistants that do these kind of things that are just trying to help out the program, and they don't care if they don't have the job and all this kind of stuff. So it is a sticky situation, but I'm just kind of tired of the NCAA. They pick and choose these weird rules that nobody really cares about. The parts that irritate me are the fact that you've probably got situations out there where there are tons of other programs where things that just as egregious or even more egregious are going on, but the NCAA doesn't necessarily seem to focus on that. But academic fraud is nothing to be sneezed at. That is something that should not happen and needs to be cleaned up. But just the overall idea of punishing Brown in the way that they did for the lack of institutional control, I don't know. I don't necessarily personally agree with the whole lack of institutional control, simply because if the NCAA is willing to agree with the fact that the head coach knew absolutely nothing about these kind of situations until it was brought to his attention, and that just the fact of him not willingly throwing his kid under the bus, not literally his kid, but his student, I don't know. The NCAA to me is a joke. They pick and choose, as I said, these punishments. It's just, there is no set thing across the board that seems fair to everybody. And I understand when you've got people cheating and looking for ways to get ahead, then there is no thing that can necessarily just be painted with a broad stroke, but ultimately I think it's kind of a ridiculous organization now. Last little thing I wanted to touch on, the Patrick Kane incident. Not going to put too much on this. Basically, it's all just blowing up. It's kind of a joke. Basically, it's starting to look like Patrick Kane may have done nothing. I feel terribly for this girl because she seems to not be involved in any of this. She was still saying that she was sexually assaulted, and if something happened, then I feel incredibly bad for her. But the way this is going to go down is not going to be in her favor, because basically whatever the situation is, because the evidence bag was apparently a bull story made up by whoever decided to do that. The lawyer representing the young woman has actually stepped down because he didn't feel comfortable taking this case to court anymore, simply because he no longer knew what was true, based on the fact that the mother apparently made up this story about the evidence bag being left at her house. And now all of a sudden that just throws everything up in the air and nobody knows what to believe. The thing that I find weird, though, about the story is the lawyer that has stepped down still says he believes that the sexual assault actually happened, but because of the evidence tampering or lying about evidence being left at the home, he no longer feels capable of taking control of the case. That in and of itself is an odd statement. So basically you're saying, okay, well, their side is lying, so I don't feel comfortable representing them, even though technically you are representing just the young woman. But you still believe the case should go forward because you believe that the assault did happen. To me, I don't understand that. I mean, if I'm a lawyer, I will come out and go to the media and say, hey, I don't know what is going on. The mother is doing all sorts of weird stuff. This part of this story is not true, but that is not necessarily pertinent to the case that we're trying to present against Patrick Kane. But I mean, if the jury is allowed to hear that at all, the grand jury, because this still hasn't gone before the grand jury, apparently. They've delayed this several times. But if the grand jury gets to hear any of that, then to me, they're just going to throw it out, because they're just like, well, there's no way that you can necessarily trust any of the stuff that's happened. And to me, that's a bad situation. It's a bad situation overall, because if the girl's making this up, then she's only looking for a payday, trying to get some sort of settlement case out of Patrick Kane, which is ultimately ridiculous, and that kind of stuff should not even exist. And if the other case is true, to where the mom just made up some weird story because she thought it would make the case look even better, but the girl actually was sexually assaulted, then, I mean, that's a terrible situation too, because all of a sudden her case is not even going to get heard, because I can almost guarantee that this ridiculousness with the made-up evidence bag being left at the house is basically going to blow up the whole thing. That is the view from the Midwest. What are your views on today's topics? Comment, rate, and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up on Facebook or YouTube. We'll keep the conversation rolling. But until the next time, see you then.
I remember